You don't even remember that night, do you? Mafia boss watched her ultrasound and couldn't breathe. The neon sign above Marco's diner buzzed with an irritating, insect-like hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate right through the soles of Elena Russo's worn-out sneakers. It was 2 a.m. in Valmont, a city that never truly slept but merely quieted down to a dangerous whisper. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, burnt bacon grease, and the lemon disinfectant Elena was using to wipe down the counter for the 3rd time that night. She paused, pressing a hand to the small of her back, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Her uniform, a dull teal dress that had seen better days, was becoming a problem. She had unzipped the side seam 2 inches and secured it with a safety pin hidden beneath her apron, but the fabric still pulled tight against her midsection. She was grateful for the oversized, grease-stained apron that Marco insisted all waitresses wear. It was the only shield she had left. Elena was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. It was a bone-deep weariness, a heaviness that sat in her marrow. She moved toward the kitchen to rack the last of the clean glasses, her movements slow and deliberate. She had to be careful. If she moved too fast, the dizziness would return. The room tilting on its axis like a ship in a storm. As the water from the sink rushed over her hands, her mind drifted, unbidden, to the past. It happened more often lately, these fragments of memory surfacing like wreckage from a submerged vessel. 6 months ago, the memory was never a complete movie. It was a series of sensory flashes, disjointed and blurry. She remembered the blinding strobe lights of a club she had no business being in. She remembered the sudden, terrifying shift in the atmosphere, shouting, the sound of breaking glass, a man grabbing her arm with bruising force, and then him. A dangerous man in a tailored suit. That was the image that stuck. He had moved through the chaos like a shark through water, efficient and terrifying. She remembered the feeling of being lifted, of feet leaving the sticky floor. There were flashing lights, but not from the club. Police lights, or maybe an ambulance, reflecting off the wet pavement outside. She remembered the weight of a suit jacket being draped over her shivering shoulders, smelling of expensive cedar and wood smoke, and the hands. That was the part that haunted her the most, for a man who had looked so lethal. His hands had been surprisingly soft when he checked her pulse, when he brushed hair out of her face in the back of a moving car. "You're safe. I've got you." Had he said that? Or had she dreamed it in the delirium of whatever shock she had been in? She remembered him driving her to her old apartment, the one she had been evicted from shortly after. She remembered him pressing something into her hand, a promise of help, a murmur about money if she ever needed it, before the darkness swallowed her whole, and she woke up the next morning in her bed, alone, with nothing but a headache and a lingering scent of cedar. The sound of a plate clattering to the floor snapped Elena back to the present. She jumped, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "Careful, Ellie," Marco grunted from the office doorway, counting the till. "You break it, you buy it, and God knows you can't afford to buy anything right now." "I know, Marco, I'm sorry." "It slipped," Elena murmured, bending awkwardly to pick up the shards. She couldn't afford anything. That was the cold, hard truth, earlier that day. The reality of her situation had been laid out in stark, clinical terms. She had visited the free clinic on 4th Street, sitting on crinkling paper while Dr. Evans, a kind but overworked woman with gray circles under her eyes, ran the cold transducer over Elena's abdomen. "The baby is growing fast, Elena," the doctor had said, her voice gentle but firm. "You are 6 months along. You are anemic. Your blood pressure is low, and you are not gaining enough weight. You need rest, and you need better nutrition. If you keep working double shifts on your feet like this, you're going to put yourself and this child at risk." Elena had stared at the grainy monitor, her heart doing a strange, terrified flip, a son or a daughter, a life that was half hers, and half the mystery man who had saved her. She left the clinic with a bottle of prenatal vitamins she couldn't pay for. Dr. Evans had slipped them into her bag with a wink and a sense of impending doom. She needed money, not just for rent, but for the baby. That desperation was what had driven her to the alleyway 3 hours ago, before her shift started. She knew who the man in the suit was now. It hadn't been hard to figure out once the fog of that night lifted and she started paying attention to the news. Dante Moretti. The name was whispered in Valmont with a mixture of reverence and fear. He owned half the city, including the nightclub where everything had gone wrong. She had stood in the rain behind the club, staring at the heavy steel security door. She couldn't just walk in. She was nobody. So she'd taken a piece of order pad paper and written a note. Her hand had shaken so badly the letters were jagged. "You said if I ever needed help, I could come to you. I don't know if you remember, but I have nowhere else to go." She signed it simply. Elena. She had taped it to the back door, right over the security camera lens where she knew someone would have to peel it off to see. It was a foolish, childish hope. He probably wouldn't even see it, or if he did, he would laugh. But the memory of those soft hands, that deep voice saying she was safe, was the only lifeline she had left. Now, wiping the counter at Marco's, she felt the foolishness of it burning her cheeks. He wasn't coming. It had been a dream, a hallucination conjured by a traumatized mind. The front door of the diner opened with a violent jangle of bells. Elena didn't look up immediately. "We're closed," she called out, scrubbing a stubborn coffee stain. "Kitchen is shut down. Registers are—" "Lock the door." The voice was low, baritone, and vibrated through the air like a thunderclap. Elena froze. The rag dropped from her hand. She knew that voice. It was the voice from the car, the voice from the darkness. She turned slowly, standing in the entrance of the diner, looking completely out of place among the faded vinyl booths and checkered tiles. Was Dante Moretti. He was imposing, taller than she remembered, filling the doorway with broad shoulders clad in a black trench coat that dripped rainwater onto the linoleum. His hair was dark, slicked back from a face that seemed carved from granite, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes that were currently burning with a cold, terrifying fury. Marco, sensing trouble, poked his head out of the office. When he saw who was standing there, his face went pale. He slammed the office door shut and locked it. The cowardice would have stung if Elena wasn't so paralyzed by fear. Dante walked toward her. He didn't rush. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther stalking a wounded deer. In his hand, he held a crumpled piece of paper. Her note. He stopped 2 feet away from her, the counter acting as a flimsy barrier between them. Up close, he was devastating. He smelled of rain and that same intoxicating cedar wood smoke, but there was no softness in him now. "Is this a joke?" Dante asked, his voice deceptively quiet. He tossed the crumpled note onto the counter. Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. "No, I have a lot of enemies in this city," Dante said, his eyes scanning her face with a mixture of recognition and disgust. "People who try to leverage me, people who try to trap me, but usually they are smarter than to leave a handwritten note on a security camera." "I wasn't trying to trap you," Elena whispered, backing away as he rounded the counter. "Then what is this?" He cornered her near the kitchen swing doors. The space suddenly felt microscopic. He loomed over her, radiating heat and anger. "You think you can blackmail me? You think because I helped a frantic waitress out of a bad situation 6 months ago, you can claim I owe you something?" He remembered the rescue. He remembered her. But his memory was twisted, stripped of the intimacy she recalled. To him, she was just a charity case who had come back for a payout. "I didn't ask for money," Elena said, her voice trembling but gaining a thread of steel. "You offered it, that night. You told me. I told you to go home and stay out of trouble." Dante cut her off, stepping closer. His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, not touching her, but caging her in. "I don't make promises to strangers, especially not ones who wait half a year to come collecting. Who put you up to this? The Silvas? Or are you just looking for a quick payday?" The accusation stung more than the fear. He thought she was a grifter. He thought she was using that traumatic night to squeeze cash out of him. She looked up at him, meeting his dark, furious gaze. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, too, the hardness that came from a life of looking over his shoulder. But she also saw the man who had covered her with his jacket. "I'm not working for anyone," she said, her voice rising. "And I didn't come for a payday. I came because I'm desperate." "Everyone in Valmont is desperate," Dante sneered. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't have my men escort you out of the city tonight." The injustice of it snapped something inside her. The fatigue, the swollen ankles, the fear of the doctor's words, the hunger, it all boiled over into a sudden, fierce heat. "Because you were there," she shouted, pushing back against the air between them. "Because you took me out of there when I couldn't walk. Because you sat in the car with me and held my hand while I shook." Dante stared at her, his expression unyielding. "I make sure civilians don't get caught in crossfire. It's business. It doesn't mean we have a connection." Elena let out a bitter, incredulous laugh, tears pricking her eyes. "A connection? Is that what you think I want?" She shook her head, the anger vibrating in her chest. "You don't even remember that night, do you?" "Not really." Dante paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "I remember enough." "No," she whispered furiously. "You don't—" Her hands went to the hem of her apron. She fumbled with the knot at her back, untying it and letting the heavy, grease-stained fabric fall to the floor. Then, with eyes locked on his, she reached for the hem of her teal uniform. Dante's eyes narrowed, his body tensing as if he expected her to pull a weapon. She didn't pull a weapon, she lifted the fabric up, just enough to expose her midsection. The silence that fell over the kitchen was heavier than the storm outside. Her stomach was undeniable. A firm, prominent curve protruding from her slender frame, the skin stretched tight. It was the silhouette of life, shocking and vulnerable against the harsh fluorescent lights of the industrial kitchen. Dante's gaze dropped. His eyes widened, the pupils blown wide. He stopped breathing. The anger that had been rolling off him in waves vanished instantly, replaced by a profound, paralyzed shock. He stared at the curve of her belly as if it were a ghost. He looked from her stomach up to her face, then back down again, his mind frantically doing the math. 6 months, the timeline aligned with a terrifying precision. "Elena," he breathed, the name sounding foreign on his tongue, softer than he intended. She dropped her shirt, shielding herself from his gaze, feeling exposed and raw. "You can walk away," she said, her voice cracking. "You can turn around, walk out that door, and pretend this never happened. I won't stop you. I won't chase you. But don't you dare stand there and tell me I'm just looking for a payday." She turned to walk away, intending to push through the swing doors and escape into the back alley. But she didn't make it 2 steps. A hand closed around her wrist. It wasn't the rough, violent grip of a mob boss. It was firm, warm, and strangely gentle, anchoring her to the spot. Elena froze. She looked back. Dante hadn't moved his feet, but he was holding on to her as if she were the only solid thing in the room. His face was pale, his composure shattered. He looked like a man who had just been told the world was ending, or perhaps just beginning. "Walk away?" he repeated, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. "Let go of me," Elena said, though she didn't pull away. "Is it—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. He looked at her stomach again, a hunger in his eyes that terrified her. "Is it mine? I haven't been with anyone else," she said quietly. "Not before. Not since—" Dante closed his eyes for a second, a muscle in his jaw ticking violently. When he opened them again, the chaos was gone, replaced by a singular, terrifying intensity. "You didn't tell me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, but one laced with something that sounded like pain. "I didn't know if you were real," she admitted. "I didn't know if you would care. And honestly, I was scared of you." "You should be," he murmured, his thumb tracing the pulse point on her inner wrist, feeling the frantic rabbit beat of her heart. "I am a dangerous man. Elena, then let me go." "No." The word was absolute. He stepped closer, invading her space again, but this time the aggression was gone, replaced by a protective, overwhelming dominance. I need proof, Elena bristled. I'm not lying to you. I believe you believe that, Dante said, his eyes searching hers, looking for any sign of deception and finding only exhaustion and fear. But in my world, we don't operate on faith. We operate on certainty. He didn't let go of her wrist. He pulled her imperceptibly closer, his body heat shielding her from the drafty kitchen. Tomorrow, he commanded, we go to a doctor. My doctor. Or yours. I don't care. But I am going to see that baby on a screen, and I am going to know for sure. I have a follow-up next week, Elena stammered, overwhelmed by his proximity. No, Dante said, shaking his head. Not next week. Tomorrow morning. I will pick you up at 8 o'clock. I have a shift. You're done working, he said, cutting her off with a tone that brooked no argument. He looked around the dingy diner with disdain. You are never lifting another tray in this place again. Elena opened her mouth to argue, to fight for her independence, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't just command, it was desperation. He was a man staring at a cliff edge, realizing he had already fallen over. 8 o'clock. Elena, he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that shivered down her spine. He finally released her wrist, his fingers lingering for a second longer than necessary. Be ready. He turned and walked out into the rain, the bells above the door chiming cheerfully, oblivious to the way the world had just shifted on its axis. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, her hand drifting back to her stomach, the imprint of his fingers still burning on her skin. 8 o'clock in the morning arrived with the heavy, gray persistence of a hangover. The rain from the previous night had not ceased. It had merely settled into a relentless, freezing drizzle that coated the city of Valmont in a sheen of gunmetal gray. Elena stood by the window of her small, drafty apartment, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her stomach. Her bag was packed, just the essentials, though she told herself she would be back by noon. She wore a loose sweater and leggings, the only clothes that didn't pinch, and watched the street below. Exactly on the hour, a matte black SUV turned the corner. It didn't look like a car, it looked like a tank dressed in a tuxedo. It glided silently to the curb directly in front of her building, the tinted windows impenetrable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, an unknown number. I am outside. 2 words, no greeting, no reassurance. Just a statement of fact. Elena took a deep breath, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. When she emerged onto the sidewalk, the rear passenger door clicked open. Dante did not get out to open it for her. A small mercy, perhaps, to avoid drawing attention in this neighborhood, or maybe just a sign of his simmering mood. She climbed inside. The interior smelled of leather, heated seats, and that faint, lingering trace of cedar and expensive tobacco. Dante sat in the seat next to her, separated by the center console. He was dressed immaculately in a charcoal suit, looking every inch the king of the city, but the circles under his eyes were dark bruises against his pale skin. He didn't look at her as the driver. A silent man with a thick neck and alert eyes pulled the vehicle away from the curb. "Did you eat?" Dante asked, staring straight ahead at the rain-slicked road. "I wasn't hungry," Elena replied, her voice small in the quiet cabin. Dante reached into the side pocket of the door and pulled out a protein bar, tossing it into her lap. "Eat. You are anemic. The doctor won't be able to get a good reading if you pass out." Elena peeled the wrapper open, her fingers trembling slightly. She took small bites, the silence in the car stretching thin and taut like a wire ready to snap. The clinic Dante had chosen was not the free clinic on 4th Street. It was a private facility in the Uptown district, a place with marble floors and a receptionist who didn't ask for insurance cards. They were ushered immediately into a back room, bypassing the waiting area entirely. The room was dim and warm. The ultrasound technician, a young woman named Sarah, bustled around with gel and towels, her cheerful demeanor faltering every time she glanced at Dante. He stood in the corner of the room like a grim reaper, arms crossed over his chest, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the space. "Okay, Elena," Sarah said, her voice a little too high. "If you could just lift your sweater." Elena lay back on the paper-covered table, exposing her stomach. She felt a flash of shame, expecting Dante to look away, to show disgust at the distortion of her body. Instead, when she glanced at him, she found him stepping closer. He wasn't looking at her face. His gaze was fixed on her belly, intense and unreadable. The cold gel hit her skin, and Sarah pressed the transducer down. At first, there was only static on the screen, a gray storm of pixels. Then, with a slight adjustment of the wand, the image cleared, a spine, a curved head, little ghostly limbs tucked tight against a chest. And then, the sound filled the room. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. It was fast, rhythmic, and strong, the sound of a galloping horse. "There is the heartbeat," Sarah said, pointing to a fluttering pixel on the screen. "Strong and steady, 150 beats per minute." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, the same way they always did. But then she heard a sharp intake of breath from the man beside her. She turned her head. Dante had moved. He was standing right next to the monitor now, one hand gripping the edge of the medical cart so hard his knuckles were white. The stoic mask he wore, the face of the ruthless businessman, the crime lord, had cracked wide open. His eyes were wide, glassy, and fixed on the screen with a look of absolute devastation. He wasn't breathing. His chest was frozen. He looked like a man witnessing a miracle and a catastrophe all at once. That, Dante's voice broke. It was a sound Elena had never expected to hear from him, a jagged, raw sound. "That is the heart?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said softly. Sensing the shift in the room, she stepped back, giving him space. Dante reached out, his hand hovering inches from the screen, trembling. He didn't touch the monitor, as if he were afraid the image would dissolve like smoke. A single tear escaped, tracking a slow, silver line down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't even seem to notice it for a long minute. The only sound in the room was that rapid, thumping heartbeat. Dante Moretti, the man who burned down buildings and commanded armies, looked utterly dismantled by the sound of a 6-month-old heart. "It's real," he whispered, the words barely audible. Elena watched him, her own heart aching. "I told you," she said softly. Dante finally tore his eyes away from the screen to look down at her. The anger was gone. In its place was a terrifying vulnerability. He looked young, suddenly, terrified. "I believe you," he said hoarsely. The ride back was different. The silence was no longer cold. It was heavy with unsaid things. Dante stared out the window, his hand occasionally twitching on his knee as if he wanted to reach out but didn't know how. Why? The word cut through the hum of the tires on the wet asphalt. Dante turned to her, his eyes regaining some of their hardness, though the red rims betrayed him. "Why did you wait 6 months?" he demanded. "Why did you let yourself starve? Why did you work yourself to the bone in that diner when you could have come to me the day you found out?" Elena looked down at her hands. "I didn't remember you clearly. Dante, I had flashes. I remembered a suit. I remembered fear. I didn't know if you were a savior or a monster. I am both," he said flatly, "but I take care of what is mine." "I didn't know I was yours," she countered, her voice rising. "I thought I was just a one-night stand you forgot. And I was right, wasn't I? You didn't remember. He stopped, frustration tightening his jaw. "I should have known. I should have found you." Suddenly, Dante sat up straighter. His gaze snapped to the side mirror. His entire demeanor shifted instantly from regretful father to alert predator. "Paolo," Dante barked at the driver. "Blue sedan. 2 cars back. How long has it been there?" The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Since the clinic. Boss, it turned left when we did." "Lose them," Dante ordered. "Do not go to her apartment." Elena panic spiked. "What? No, I need to go home. My uniform is there. I have a shift." "You don't have a shift," Dante snapped, pulling his phone from his pocket and typing rapidly. "And you are not going back to that apartment. If they followed us from the clinic, they know who you are with. That burns your location." "Who? Who followed us?" Elena twisted in her seat to look out the back window. "Sit back," Dante commanded, his hand shooting out to press her back against the leather seat. Keep your head down." The SUV surged forward, the engine roaring as Paolo aggressively changed lanes, weaving through traffic with terrifying precision. The blue sedan tried to keep up, but Paolo took a sharp, screeching turn down a narrow side street, then another, losing the tail in the labyrinth of Valmont's industrial district. 30 minutes later, they were heading out of the city, climbing the winding roads toward the heavily wooded hills that overlooked Valmont. "Where are you taking me?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "A safe house," Dante said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was busy on his phone, barking orders in Italian. When he finally hung up, he looked at her. "My main residence is too obvious. The apartment is compromised. This is a secure location. Nobody knows about it except Paolo and my head of security. I can't just disappear," Elena argued, though the fight was draining out of her. "I have a life." "You have a target on your back," Dante corrected her. "And now, so does the child, until I find out who was in that car. Your life is this house." The safe house was a fortress disguised as a modern architectural marvel. It was all glass and steel, perched on a cliff edge, surrounded by high walls and dense forest. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly isolating. For the rest of the day, the house became a battleground of wills. Dante treated her like a fragile piece of evidence he had to protect. He tried to confine her to the master suite, Elena, fueled by pregnancy hormones and a lifetime of fending for herself, refused to be coddled. "I am not an invalid," she snapped when he tried to tell her to rest for the third time that afternoon. "I am pregnant. There is a difference." "You are small," he argued, pacing the living room floor. "The doctor said you are underweight. You need to lie down." "I need to move or I will go crazy," she retorted. By evening, an uneasy truce had settled. Dante had retreated to the study to deal with the fallout of the day, leaving Elena alone in the vast, silent house. The place was stocked with food, expensive, rich ingredients she barely knew how to cook, but the act of chopping vegetables calmed her. It was a rhythm she understood. She made a simple pasta dish, the smell of garlic and basil filling the sterile kitchen, making it feel slightly less like a prison. She didn't offer any to Dante. She ate alone at the massive marble island, the silence pressing in on her ears. That night, the nightmares came. It was the same dream she had endured for months, but sharper now. The club, the noise, the feeling of being drugged, her limbs heavy as lead, men's faces blurring into demonic shapes, and then the sensation of falling. Elena woke with a gasp. Sitting bolt upright in the unfamiliar bed, her heart was hammering against her ribs, sweat cooling on her skin. The digital clock read 3 in the morning. She couldn't stay in the dark room. She needed water. She padded barefoot down the hallway, wrapping her robe tight around her. The house was silent, bathed in the silver glow of the moonlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. When she reached the kitchen, she realized she wasn't alone. Dante was sitting on a stool at the island, a half-empty glass of amber liquid in front of him. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie hours ago. His dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked wrecked. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched there. He didn't look up when she entered, staring into the depths of his Scotch glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice rough with drink and fatigue. "I had a nightmare," Elena admitted, walking over to the fridge to get a bottle of water. "Join the club," he muttered. She hesitated, then moved to stand on the opposite side of the island, in the dim light. The tension from the day seemed to have evaporated, leaving only 2 tired people in a big, empty house. "Dante," she started, testing the weight of his name. "About that night, at the club." He took a slow sip of his drink. "What about it?" "Why don't you remember it?" she asked softly. "You said you remember enough, but you looked at the ultrasound today like you were seeing a ghost. If we were together, how could you forget?" Dante was silent for a long time. He swirled the liquid in his glass. "Because I think I was drugged too." Elena's eyes widened. What? I went to that club to meet a contact, Dante said, his voice low. I had one drink. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in my penthouse the next morning with a splitting headache and a gap in my memory about 4 hours wide. My security team said I left with a woman. They said I took her home, but I couldn't remember your face. I just remembered a feeling, a need to protect. He looked up at her then, his eyes dark and intense. I thought it was a setup. I thought someone drugged me to get information, or to kill me. I never imagined. His gaze dropped to her stomach. I never imagined the result would be this. It wasn't a setup, Elena whispered. I was working. I was just a waitress, I think. I think someone slipped something in my drink, too. I felt so dizzy. A man tried to grab me, and then you were there. The Silvas, Dante said, the name coming out like a curse. It was their club. If they drugged both of us, it was for leverage. They wanted to compromise me, but they didn't count on me getting you out. He reached across the island. It was a slow, deliberate movement. His hand, large and warm, covered where it rested on the cold marble. Elena's breath hitched. His skin was rough, calloused from weapons and work, but his touch was incredibly gentle. I'm sorry, he said, for leaving you alone, for not knowing. Elena looked at their joined hands. For 6 months, she had hated him, she had feared him. But now, seeing the guilt in his eyes, hearing the tremor in his voice, the walls began to crumble. You're here now, she said. I am, he vowed. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. It was an electric, intimate contact that sent a shiver up her arm. For a second, the air between them crackled with a sudden, undeniable pull, the ghost of the chemistry that must have brought them together that night. Then, the fear returned, the reality of who he was. She pulled her hand away, stepping back. I should go back to bed, she stammered. Dante didn't try to stop her. He just nodded, his hand curling into a fist on the counter where hers had been. Go. Try to sleep. Just as Elena reached the hallway, Dante's phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't a text vibration. It was the jarring, persistent ring of an emergency line. Dante answered it instantly, his demeanor shifting from weary to lethal in a split second. Moretti, he answered. Elena froze in the shadows, listening. When? Dante demanded. Is he alive? A pause. The silence in the kitchen grew cold. Who talked? Dante's voice was ice. Find them. Burn the whole block if you have to. I want a name. He hung up the phone and slammed it down on the counter hard enough to crack the screen. He ran a hand through his hair, gripping the back of his neck. What happened? Elena asked, her voice trembling. Dante turned to her. The vulnerability was gone. The wall was back up, higher than before. One of my men, he said. Matteo. He was following a lead on who leaked your address to the Silvas. He was shot 20 minutes ago outside a warehouse in the docks. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. Is he? He's in surgery. It's bad. Dante walked around the island, moving toward the living room where he had left his shoulder holster. He began strapping it over his dress shirt. The Silvas know, he said, checking the clip of his handgun with a metallic click. They know I have you. They know about the baby. That car today wasn't just a tail. It was a scout. He looked at her, his eyes burning with a terrifying resolve. You are not leaving this house. Elena, not for a doctor, not for fresh air, not for anything. The world outside these walls is dead to you until I say otherwise. You're scaring me, she whispered. Good, Dante said, holstering the weapon. Fear keeps you alert. Fear keeps you alive. He walked to the window, staring out into the pitch-black forest, a sentinel guarding his most precious, accidental treasure. I vowed to protect you 6 months ago, even if I don't remember saying it, he murmured to the reflection in the glass. I'm not going to fail twice. Elena watched him, realizing that the safe house was no longer just a shelter. It was the center of a war, and she was the cause. The safe house was a cage of glass and steel, beautiful and suffocating. 2 days had passed since Dante had brought her here, and the silence of the surrounding forest was beginning to scream in Elena's ears. She felt disconnected from the world, suspended in a bubble where time moved like molasses. Dante was often gone, disappearing into the secure command center in the basement or taking calls on the terrace. His voice, a low, angry rumble that carried on the wind. Desperation clawed at her throat. She needed a connection to her old life, something real to anchor her. While Dante was downstairs reviewing security protocols, Elena found an old landline tucked away in the guest study. She knew she shouldn't use it. Dante had been explicit about the blackout on communications, but the isolation was a physical ache. She dialed the only number she had memorized by heart, Rosa's. Rosa had been her friend since culinary school, a loud, brash woman who worked at a bakery downtown. She was the only person Elena had told about the pregnancy in the beginning, before the fear made her go silent. The phone rang 4 times before a breathless voice answered. "Hello?" "Rosa, it's me," Elena whispered, her hand cupping the receiver tight against her ear. "Elena, my God, where have you been? I went to Marco's and the place was locked up. Nobody has seen you in days." "I'm safe," Elena said, leaning against the cold mahogany desk. I'm staying with my father." There was a pause on the line, heavy and strange. "The father, you mean the guy from the club? The one you said was a ghost?" "He's not a ghost," Elena said, glancing nervously at the door. "He's real. Look, I just needed to hear a friendly voice. I feel like I'm losing my mind out here." "Where is out here?" Rosa asked. Her tone was casual, but there was a sharpness to it, an urgency that pricked at Elena's instincts. "I don't know exactly," Elena admitted. "Some house in the hills. It overlooks the river, way past the old industrial district. It's isolated." "The hills past the industrial district," Rosa repeated slowly. "That sounds fancy. Is he treating you okay?" "He's trying," Elena said. "I think he's trying." "Well, you take care of yourself. Honey, stay put. Don't move." "I will. I miss you." "Rosa." "Miss you too, babe." The line went dead. Elena hung up, a strange knot forming in her stomach. She told herself it was just nerves, just the paranoia Dante had instilled in her. She didn't see Rosa, miles away in a cramped apartment, setting her phone down on a table where a man with a snake tattoo on his neck was waiting. She didn't see the man slide a thick envelope of cash across the table. She didn't hear Rosa whisper, "She's in the hills, overlooking the river." Downstairs in the windowless war room, Dante Moretti was traveling back in time. The large monitors on the wall flickered with grainy, monochromatic footage. For the last 48 hours, his team had been scouring the city for any digital footprint of that night 6 months ago. It had cost him a fortune in bribes to get the backup servers from the security company that managed the club. But Dante paid without blinking. He needed to know. He watched the screen. His eyes narrowed. The timestamp read 11 at night. He saw himself enter the VIP section. He looked composed, lethal, the way he always did. He watched himself take a drink from a server, a blonde woman he didn't recognize. Then, the timestamp jumped to midnight. The change was subtle at first, then alarming. On screen, Dante stumbled. He gripped the edge of a velvet booth, shaking his head as if trying to clear water from his ears. A man in a dark jacket approached him, one of the Silva lieutenants. They exchanged words. Dante shoved the man away. Then the chaos started. The brawl broke out on the lower dance floor. Dante leaned forward, freezing the frame. In the background, near the service bar, he saw a flash of teal. Elena, she looked terrified, pinned against the bar by the crushing crowd. A man grabbed her arm. On the screen, Dante saw his own figure react. It wasn't the calculated move of a strategist. It was pure, animalistic instinct. He saw himself wade through the violence, throwing men aside like rag dolls until he reached her. He watched himself drape his jacket over her. He watched the way he shielded her head with his hand as he guided her out the back exit. He pressed play on the exterior camera feed. The rain was pouring in sheets. He leaned against the brick wall, sliding down slightly before catching himself. He was heavily drugged. That was obvious now. His movements were sluggish, his coordination compromised, yet he didn't let go of the girl. He bundled her into the waiting car and climbed in after her. Dante sat back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. It hadn't been a transaction. It hadn't been a cold rescue. Even through the haze of whatever cocktail the Silvas had slipped him, he had chosen her. He had protected her. He rewound the footage to the moment he put the jacket on her shoulders, the way his hand lingered on her neck. He hadn't just been saving a civilian. He had been drawn to her. Upstairs, the silence had become unbearable for Elena. She wandered the halls of the mansion, her socks sliding on the polished hardwood floors. The house was impersonal, decorated in shades of slate and charcoal, devoid of clutter or warmth. It felt like a hotel for a ghost. She pushed open a set of double doors at the end of the east wing and found herself in a library. Unlike the rest of the house, this room smelled of old paper and dust. The shelves were lined with leather-bound books that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. On the mantel above the unlit fireplace, there was a collection of framed photographs. Elena moved closer, her curiosity overriding her sense of intrusion. The photos were old. There was a black and white picture of a stern-looking man who resembled Dante. There was a woman with sad eyes. And then, there were pictures of two children, a boy and a girl. The boy was unmistakably Dante, even at 10 or 11 years old. He had that intense, brooding look, his dark hair falling into his eyes. But the girl next to him was pure light. She was laughing in every photo, her arms thrown around Dante's neck, her smile wide and infectious. In one photo, they were sitting on a dock, the boy pointing at something in the water, the girl looking at him with adoration. Elena picked up a small, silver-framed photo of the two of them as teenagers. The girl was beautiful, wearing a white sundress. Dante was standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking at the camera with a fierce protectiveness. Her name was Sophia, Elena gasped, nearly dropping the frame. She spun around. Dante was standing in the doorway. He had shed the holster, but the tension was still etched into the lines of his shoulders. He walked into the room, his footsteps silent on the Persian rug. "I'm sorry," Elena stammered, hastily putting the photo back on the mantel. I didn't mean to pry." "It is not prying," Dante said quietly. He came to stand beside her, looking at the photo of the laughing girl. His expression softened, the hard mask of the dawn slipping away to reveal a deep, ancient wound. "She was 2 years younger than me. She was beautiful," Elena said softly. "She was the best of us," Dante corrected. "My family. We are not good people. Elena, we destroy. But Sophia, she was different. She wanted to be a pediatrician. She hated the business. She hated the violence." He reached out and traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "What happened to her?" Elena asked, daring to bridge the gap. "She died when she was 19, Dante said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more heartbreaking. "A car accident, or that is what the police report said. It was a bomb meant for my father. She borrowed his car to go to the library." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Dante, I was supposed to drive her," he continued, his gaze fixed on the past. "But I had business. I told her to take the car. I put the keys in her hand." He turned to look at Elena, his eyes dark pools of grief. "That is why I am the way I am. That is why I don't let people in. Because the things I love, they get broken, they get taken. You blame yourself," Elena whispered. "I killed her," he stated simply, just as surely as if I had planted the bomb myself. "After she died, I decided that I would never be vulnerable again. I shut it all off. I became what the city needed me to be. A monster. A machine." "You're not a machine," Elena said fiercely. Dante looked at her, really looked at her, studying the defiance in her jaw and the softness of her eyes. "6 months ago, when I saw you in that club, you looked like her." Elena froze. "What?" "Not her face," Dante clarified quickly, stepping closer. "But the innocence. The light. You didn't belong in that darkness. Seeing you terrified, it woke something up in me that I thought was dead. I couldn't save Sophia, but I could save you." The distance between them had vanished. He was standing inches from her, the heat of his body radiating toward her. Elena looked up at him, seeing not the Mafia boss, but the grieving brother, the man carrying a mountain of guilt. "You did save me," she whispered, "and you're saving me now." "I am trying," Dante murmured. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air in the library grew heavy, charged with the electricity that had been simmering between them since the diner kitchen. "But I am terrified. Elena, I look at you, I look at the child, and I see another chance for the world to hurt me." "Then don't let them," Elena said, her voice trembling. She reached out, her hand hesitating before resting on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy, steady, rhythmic. "You're not alone anymore. Dante." Dante let out a ragged breath. He raised his hand, his fingers grazing her jawline, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. His touch was reverence, not possession. "I don't want to be alone," he confessed. He leaned down, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She rose on her tiptoes, closing the final inch. The kiss was not an explosion. It was a collision of two desperate souls. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with a slow, agonizing tenderness. Elena made a soft sound in her throat, her fingers curling into his shirt. Dante groaned low in his chest, his arm winding around her waist to pull her flush against him, careful of the baby between them. He pressed her gently back against the bookshelf, his body shielding her, surrounding her. He kissed her like he was trying to memorize the taste of her, drinking in her forgiveness and her strength. "Elena," he whispered against her mouth, his voice rough. "Tell me to stop." "Don't stop," she breathed, burying her hands in his hair. "Please don't stop." He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her out of the library and down the hall to the master bedroom. The storm outside battered the windows, but inside, the world narrowed down to the two of them. They undressed each other with shaking hands. There was no rush, no aggressive hunger. It was a slow discovery. Dante treated her body like a sacred thing, his hands worshiping the curve of her hips, the swell of her breasts, the roundness of her stomach. When he finally joined their bodies, it was with a profound, earth-shattering slowness. Elena gasped, arching into him, feeling the walls she had built around her heart disintegrate. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, whispering things in Italian she didn't understand but felt in her soul. They moved together in a rhythm of grief and hope, finding solace in the friction of skin on skin. It was an act of reclaiming the night they had lost, reclaiming the intimacy that had been stolen by drugs and trauma. For the first time in 6 months, Elena felt completely safe, and for the first time in a decade, Dante felt completely alive. When Elena woke the next morning, the bed beside her was cold. She reached out, her hand meeting only empty sheets. Panic, sharp and immediate, pierced through the haze of sleep. She sat up, clutching the duvet to her chest. The room was empty. The silence of the house felt menacing again. Had he left? Was last night a mistake? Had the morning light brought back the cold, detached crime lord? She scrambled out of bed, throwing on his discarded shirt that hung to her knees. She ran into the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Dante?" she called out, her voice cracking. She reached the top of the stairs just as the front door opened. Dante walked in, shaking rain from his hair. He was dressed in black jeans and a sweater, looking less like a boss and more like a man. He carried a small, worn wooden box in his hands. He looked up and saw her standing there, disheveled and frightened. His expression softened instantly. "I didn't run," he said, reading her mind. Elena let out a long exhale, her shoulders sagging. "I woke up and you were gone. I had to get something," he said, climbing the stairs 2 at a time until he reached her. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I realized I have given you nothing but fear. I wanted to give you something else." He led her back into the bedroom and sat her down on the edge of the rumpled bed. He placed the wooden box in her lap. "Open it," he said. Elena lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. It was old, slightly tarnished, but beautiful. It was Sophia's, Dante said, his voice thick. She wore it every day. It has St. Christopher on it, the protector of travelers. He took the necklace from the box and moved behind her. Elena lifted her hair, her neck baring to him. She felt the cool metal settle against her skin, followed by the warmth of his fingers clasping the latch. "She would have loved you," Dante whispered into her ear, his arms coming around to hold her from behind, his hands resting protectively on her belly. "She would have loved this baby. I want you to wear it, so I know you are watched over, even when I am not there." Elena touched the locket, tears streaming down her face. "Dante, I can't take this. It's too important." "That is why you must take it." "Nah," he said, kissing the top of her head, "because you are important." The moment of peace was shattered by the sudden blurring of the television in the corner of the room, which had been left on mute on the news channel. The screen flashed red with a breaking news banner. Dante's head snapped up. He grabbed the remote and unmuted the volume. Firefighters are still battling the blaze in downtown Valmont this morning. The historic Marco's Diner, a staple of the community for 30 years, has been completely destroyed by what investigators are calling a suspicious fire. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. On the screen, orange flames licked at the skeletal remains of the diner. The teal sign she had cleaned 1,000 times was melting into slag. Smoke billowed into the gray sky. Authorities say the building was empty at the time, but the devastation is total. The owner, Marco Rossi, is reportedly safe but distraught. "Marco," Elena sobbed. "My job, my life." Dante stood up, his movement abrupt and violent. The tenderness of the morning evaporated, replaced by a cold, lethal rage. He stared at the screen, his jaw set so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying octave. "Why?" Elena cried, looking up at him. "Why would they burn a diner?" "Because you worked there," Dante said, turning to her. His eyes were dark voids. "They couldn't find you at your apartment. They couldn't find you here. So they hit the only other place connected to you. They are sending a message." He walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked forest, but seeing only enemies. "They want to flush me out," he said. "They want me to panic. They want me to make a mistake." He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. "Initiate Protocol 0, he barked into the phone. "Full lockdown. No one in or out of the perimeter. Double the guard on the main road and find out which one of the Silva lieutenants lit the match. I want his head on a spike by midnight." He hung up and turned back to Elena. He looked at the necklace around her throat, then at her tear-stained face. "I am sorry," he said. And this time, it wasn't an apology for the past. It was an apology for the war that was about to begin. "I thought I could hide you, but I was wrong." He walked over, knelt before her, and took her hands in his. "We are done hiding," Dante vowed. "If they want a war, I will give them a massacre." The silence following the news report was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the phantom scent of smoke and the weight of unspent ash. Elena stood in the center of the living room, her hands trembling violently where they were pressed against her mouth. The image of the burning diner was seared into her retinas, the place that had given her soup when she was hungry, the place that had been her only sanctuary in a city that wanted to chew her up and spit her out. Now, it is gone, because of her. Dante was still on the phone, barking orders in a language she couldn't track. His back turned to her. His shoulders were rigid, a wall of tension that seemed ready to crumble or explode. "Dante," she said, her voice cracking. He ignored her. Or perhaps he didn't hear her over the roar of his own fury. He was pacing, his hand gripping the phone so tight his knuckles were white. "Dante!" she screamed. He stopped. He lowered the phone slowly, turning to face her. His eyes were terrifying, black pits of cold, calculated violence. But Elena was past the point of fear. The grief was too large, too consuming. "You said you would protect me," she accused, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "You brought me here. You locked me away. And while I'm sitting in this glass castle eating gourmet food, Marco's life is in ashes. People are dying, Dante. They are losing everything because of me. She took a step toward him, poking a finger at his chest. I am the poison, she sobbed. Everywhere I go, I bring ruin. Maybe I should just leave. If I turn myself over to them, maybe they'll stop. Stop it, Dante roared. The sound was so loud it seemed to rattle the window panes. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, grabbing her shoulders. He didn't shake her, but his grip was iron hard, grounding her, forcing her to look at him. Do not ever say that, he snarled, his face inches from hers. Do not ever put this on yourself. But it's true, she cried. They burned the diner to get to me. No, Dante shouted, his control finally snapping. They burned the diner to get to me. They are not dying because of you. Elena, they are dying because of who I am. They are dying because they made the mistake of standing next to Dante Moretti. He released her abruptly, turning away to run his hands through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. This is my world, he spat. This is the rot I live in. The Silvas don't care about you. To them, you are just a pawn on a chessboard. They know I have a weakness now. For 10 years, I was untouchable because I cared about nothing. I had no heart to stab. Now, he stopped, looking back at her. His expression was tortured. Now they know I have a heart again, and they are going to try to cut it out of my chest to see me bleed. Elena stood frozen. The air left her lungs, a weakness. He wasn't talking about a strategic liability. He was talking about her and the baby. The baby, she whispered, her hands flying to her stomach instinctively. Oh God, Dante, he'll never be safe. If this is your life, if this is what happens, he will never be safe. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, her body racking with sobs. The reality of the Mafia world, which had been a distant, abstract concept, was now a burning building on the news and a target on her unborn child's back. Dante watched her crumble, and the rage in his eyes cooled into a steely, terrifying resolve. He walked over to her, kneeling on the plush rug so he was eye level with her heaving stomach. He placed his large hands over hers, covering the child they had made. Listen to me, he said, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating vow. I cannot undo the past. I cannot unburn the diner. But I swear to you, on my sister's grave, I will scour this city clean. I will eliminate every threat. I will burn the Silva Empire to the ground until there is not even a shadow left to frighten you. You think they are sending a message? No. I am about to write the reply. 2 hours later, the atmosphere in the safe house had shifted from grief to cold, military precision. Dante had gone down to the basement levels, where the soundproofing was absolute. Elena stayed upstairs, clutching the St. Christopher locket, trying to block out the knowledge of what was happening below. She knew Dante was a dangerous man, but she was learning that his danger was a necessary shield in the basement. Dante stood in the center of a concrete room. Tied to a metal chair was a man named Vinny, a mid-level security guard who had been on the payroll for 3 years. Vinny was sweating profusely, his face pale, though Dante hadn't touched him yet. I checked the logs. Vinny, Dante said, his voice conversational, which made it infinitely worse. You disabled the perimeter sensors on the east wall for 3 minutes yesterday, just long enough for a scout car to get a visual on the house. Boss, please, Vinny stammered. They have my brother, the Silvas. They said if I didn't give them a location, they'd kill him. Dante stared at him, his face impassive. He understood leverage. He understood family. But he also understood treason. So you traded my family for yours, Dante said. I didn't think they'd burn anything, Vinny cried. They just wanted to know where the girl was. They said they wanted to grab her, use her to draw you out to the shipyard. Dante went still. To the shipyard? Yes, they have a trap set. They wanted to kidnap her, make you come for her alone. They have snipers set up on the cranes. It was supposed to be a trade. The girl for your territory. Dante nodded slowly. It was a classic, brutal tactic. Use the woman to lure the king into the open. It was exactly what he would have done in their position. You gave them the location, Dante said. I had to. Vinny wept. Dante turned to his head of security, a massive man named Rico. Take him away. He's done here. Boss? Vinny asked, hopeful. I'm not going to kill you, Vinny, Dante said, walking toward the door. But you are never setting foot in Valmont again. If I see you in this city, or any city I operate in, you are a dead man. Consider your brother's debt paid. Dante walked out of the room, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind him. He didn't feel mercy. He just didn't have the time for execution. He had a trap for Spring. He walked into the command center where his top lieutenants were waiting. The Silvas want to kidnap Elena, Dante announced, leaning over the tactical map spread on the table. They want to lure me to the shipyard. They think she is my weakness. He looked up, a dark, wolfish smile curling his lips. So, let's give them exactly what they want. Boss? Rico asked. We use a decoy, Dante said. Get Maria. She's the same height, same build. Put her in a wig. Pat her stomach. We're going to stage a movement. We make it look like we are moving Elena to a new safe house. We let the Silvas snatch the transport. Maria can handle herself. Rico nodded. She's the best close-quarters combatant we have. Exactly, Dante said. They will think they are grabbing a pregnant waitress. They will be grabbing a viper. And while they are busy with the bait, we will be moving into position to cut off the head of the snake. The days that followed were a strange mix of high-stakes planning and domestic intimacy. The safe house, once a cold prison, began to feel like a fortress of solitude for just the two of them, with the threat level at maximum. Dante refused to sleep in a separate room. He moved his things into the master suite. It wasn't a sexual demand, it was a security protocol. But the proximity changed everything. They slept in the same massive bed, a few inches of space between them that grew smaller every night. Elena got used to the sound of his breathing, the heat of his body acting as a furnace against the drafty house. One evening, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the forest washed clean and silent. They were lying in bed, the room dark save for the moonlight spilling across the duvet. Elena was tracing the patterns on the sheet with her finger, unable to sleep. "Dante?" she whispered. "I'm awake." His deep voice rumbled from the pillow next to hers. What if we're bad at this?" she asked. "Parenting. I grew up in foster homes. You grew up in this. What if we don't know how to be normal?" Dante shifted, turning on his side to face her. His eyes caught the moonlight. "We will not be normal," he admitted. "We will never be the family with the white picket fence and the golden retriever, but we will be present. My father was a ghost. Your parents were absent. We will be there. That is half the battle." Elena smiled in the dark. "I want him to play piano. Don't shoot guns." "Piano is good," Dante agreed. "And maybe soccer, something that involves running away from trouble, not toward it." Elena laughed softly, a sound that seemed to lighten the heavy air of the room. She shifted closer to him, the inevitable magnetic pull bringing them together. She rested her hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the cotton t-shirt. "Dante," she said, her voice turning serious, "do you ever wish you could undo that night, the club, if you hadn't gone there, if you hadn't saved me? None of this would be happening to you. You wouldn't have a target on your back." Dante went quiet. For a moment, she thought she had overstepped, touched a nerve that was too raw. Then he reached out. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing over her lips. "I have asked myself that," he murmured. "When the diner burned, when I saw the fear in your eyes, I asked myself if it would have been better if I had stayed home." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "But then I hear the heartbeat," he whispered, "and I smell your skin, and I know the answer. No. I would walk into that club 1,000 times. I would take the bullet, the drug, the war. I would take it all." "Why?" she breathed. "Because it gave me you," he said, the truth of it ringing in the silence. "And it gave me him. Before that night, I was just surviving, waiting to die. Now I have something to live for." The confession hung between them, raw and beautiful, Elena felt her heart swell until it threatened to burst. The fear of the Silvas, the uncertainty of the future, it all faded into the background. All that mattered was the man in front of her. She kissed him, this time. There was no hesitation. There was no shyness. She kissed him with a fierce, possessive need, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. Dante responded instantly, a low groan vibrating in his chest. He rolled over, hovering above her, his weight supported on his elbows to keep from pressing on the baby. He looked down at her like she was the only light in the universe. "Elena," he warned, his voice ragged, "if we start this—" "I trust you," she interrupted, looking straight into his soul. "I trust you with my life. I trust you with my body. I trust you with everything." The last wall between them crumbled. They made love with a slow, burning urgency. It wasn't just about pleasure, it was an affirmation of life in the face of death. Dante was careful, reverent, treating her with a tenderness that belied the violence of his world. His hands mapped every inch of her, memorizing her shape, her softness. Elena met him measure for measure, her touch grounding him, pulling him out of the darkness and into the warmth of the present. She kissed the scars on his shoulder, the tension in his jaw. She whispered his name like a prayer, in the quiet aftermath, lying tangled together in the sheets. Dante held her against his chest, his chin resting on the top of her head, his hand splayed over her stomach, feeling the occasional shift of the baby inside, for the first time in his life. Dante Moretti felt peace, but peace, in Valmont, was always temporary. The shattering of the moment came not from a noise, but from the vibration of the secure phone on the nightstand. It was the specific pattern for high-priority intel. Dante didn't want to move. He wanted to stay in this cocoon forever, but he was a general first, and a lover second. He disentangled himself gently from Elena's arms and reached for the phone. He answered it, his voice instantly shifting back to command mode. "Report." He listened for a full minute, his eyes hardening, the warmth of the bed fading from his gaze. "Confirmed?" he asked. "Good. Get the team ready. We move on my mark." He hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the bed, the muscles in his back tense. Elena sat up, pulling the sheet around her, sensing the shift. "What is it?" Dante turned to look at her. The lever was gone, tucked away for safekeeping. The dawn was back. "The Silvas are moving," he said. "We've confirmed intel. They are planning to hit the decoy transport in 2 nights. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. 2 nights, he repeated. "That is when this ends, one way or another." He turned back to her, his expression fierce. "I need you to be strong. Elena, for 48 hours, things are going to get very loud and very dangerous. But when the smoke clears, the Silvas will be a memory." Elena nodded, swallowing her fear. She touched the locket at her throat. "I'm ready." Dante looked at her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He knew she wasn't ready, no one ever was, but he would burn the world down to make sure she never had to be ready again. "Get some sleep," he said, walking toward the door to check the locks one last time. "The war starts in the morning." The war room in the basement of the safe house was buzzing with a low, frantic energy. Maps were spread across the steel table. Weapon crates were being pried open, and the air smelled of gun oil and stale coffee. Dante stood at the head of the table, outlining the final movements of the operation. He looked like a general preparing for a siege, cold, precise, and utterly detached. Elena stood in the doorway, unnoticed at first. She wore a heavy sweater that did little to hide the prominent curve of her belly, her hand resting on it as she listened. "Maria drives the transport vehicle into the east sector of the abandoned lot," Dante was saying, pointing to a marked location on the map. "She will wear the wig and the coat, the profile matches. The Silvas will swarm the car. Once they are in the kill box, we close the net from the north and south." "And Elena?" Rico asked, checking the magazine of his rifle. "Elena stays here," Dante said, his voice brooking no argument. 2 guards at the door. Complete lockdown." Elena stepped into the room. "No!" The single word cut through the hum of the room like a knife. Every head turned. Dante looked up, his expression darkening instantly. "Elena," he warned, his voice low. "Go back upstairs. I am not staying here while you go out there to end this," she said, walking toward the table. Her legs were shaking, but her chin was held high. "You said the Silvas are expecting me. You said they want to lure you out using me. If they realize I'm not there, if they realize it's a trap before you close the net, they will run, and this will never end." "That is a risk I am taking," Dante snapped. "I'm not risking you." "You are risking our future," she countered, her voice rising. She stopped at the edge of the table, gripping the cold metal. "I found the itinerary. Dante, I saw the tactical setup. You're using Maria as bait, but what if they have spotters? What if they know?" "It is decided," Dante said, turning his back on her to address Rico. "Don't you turn your back on me," Elena shouted. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody shouted at Dante Moretti. His men looked down at their boots, uncomfortable. Dante turned slowly. The anger in his eyes was terrifying, but Elena didn't flinch. She had seen the man beneath the monster, and she wasn't afraid anymore. "You are pregnant," Dante hissed, stepping into her personal space. "You are a civilian. You do not belong in a war zone." "I am already in the war zone," she cried, gesturing to the bunker around them. "They burned my workplace. They hunted me down. I am part of this, whether you like it or not." She took a breath, her voice steadying, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Don't treat me like I'm fragile. I'm carrying your child, not made of glass." Dante stared at her. The words seemed to strike him physically. He looked at her stomach, then up to her fierce, determined eyes. He saw the same steel he possessed, reflected back at him. She wasn't asking for permission, she was demanding partnership. He ran a hand over his face, a groan of frustration escaping his throat. He knew she was right. If the Silvas sensed a trap, they would vanish, and the threat would hang over their heads forever. To end it, the bait had to look real. "Fine," he growled. "Boss?" Rico sounded alarmed. "She comes," Dante said, his eyes never leaving Elena's. "But she stays in the armored command SUV. Tinted windows, bulletproof glass. She sits in the back, on the floorboards. And Rico, you drive her. If a single bullet scratches the paint of that car, I will skin you alive." The confrontation site was a desolate expanse of cracked concrete on the edge of the old industrial park, an abandoned parking lot surrounded by rusting shipping containers and the skeletal remains of a factory. The rain had returned, turning the ground into a slick, black mirror that reflected the distant city lights. Elena sat in the back of the black command SUV, huddled on the floor as Dante had ordered. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The heavy Kevlar vest Dante had forced her to wear was uncomfortable and tight, pressing against her lungs. Dante was in the front seat, checking his weapon. He turned to look at her over the console. In the dim light of the dashboard, his face was a mask of concentration, but his eyes were soft when they landed on her. "Stay down," he whispered. "No matter what you hear, stay down. Come back to me," she whispered back. He nodded once, then opened the door and slipped out into the rain. Elena listened. She could hear the rain drumming on the roof of the car. She heard the static of the radio on the dashboard. Target approaching, 2 vehicles, black sedans. Elena held her breath. This was it. Through the gap between the front seats, she could see the parking lot through the windshield. In the center of the open space, the decoy car sat idling, its headlights cutting through the mist. Inside, Maria was waiting, dressed in Elena's coat. The 2 enemy sedans rolled into the lot, circling the decoy car like sharks. They came to a stop, boxing it in. Doors opened. Men with guns stepped out. Elena peeked up, just enough to see. A man in a long tan coat stepped out of the lead sedan. It was the Silva underboss. He walked toward the decoy car, shouting something that was lost in the wind. Maria didn't move. "Get out!" the Silva lieutenant shouted. Raising a shotgun, Maria opened the door and stepped out slowly, keeping her head down, her hands raised. From a distance, in the rain, she looked exactly like Elena. The lieutenant stepped closer, reaching out to grab her hair to pull her face up. "Wait!" A voice crackled over the radio in Elena's car. It wasn't one of Dante's men. It was a frequency intercept. "That's not her. The walk is wrong." Dante's voice exploded over the comms. "Take the shot, now!" The night erupted. It wasn't like the movies. It was louder, messier, and more terrifying. Gunfire popped and cracked like fireworks gone wrong. The windows of the Silva sedans shattered. Maria dropped to the ground, rolling under the cover of the car as she drew her own weapon. Elena flinched, covering her head with her arms as the SUV she was in shook. "Stay down," Rico shouted from the driver's seat, putting the car in reverse to get them out of the line of fire. But the Silvas were not stupid. They had a backup team. From the shadows of the shipping containers to their right, a third car roared out, cutting off their retreat. It slammed into the side of the SUV with a sickening crunch of metal. Elena was thrown sideways, her shoulder hitting the door panel. "Contact right," Rico yelled, drawing his sidearm and firing through his own window. Glass rained down on Elena. The door next to her was wrenched open. A hand grabbed her jacket. She screamed, kicking out blindly. She connected with something solid. A man cursed. "I got her," the man shouted. "No!" Elena scrambled backward, scrambling across the seats. Suddenly, a dark shape materialized out of the rain. It was Dante. He moved with a terrifying speed, tackling the man who had grabbed her. They hit the wet pavement with a bone-jarring thud. Dante didn't hesitate. He fired 2 shots into the man's chest at point-blank range. He scrambled up, ripping the door of the SUV open. "Get out!" he roared at her. "The gas tank is ruptured! Move!" Elena didn't ask questions. She threw herself out of the car, landing in the puddles. Dante grabbed her arm, hauling her up. The air smelled of gasoline and cordite. "Run!" he commanded, shoving her toward a large concrete pillar that supported the derelict factory overhang. "Get behind the pillar!" Elena ran. She could hear bullets whizzing past them, angry hornets in the air. She threw herself behind the thick concrete column, pressing her back against the rough surface, gasping for air. Dante didn't hide with her. He stood in front of the pillar, using his body as a shield, firing back at the Silvas who were advancing from the third car. "Dante, get down!" she screamed. He ignored her. He was a wall of fire and fury. He took down one man, then another. The Silva lieutenant, the one in the tan coat, had taken cover behind a dumpster. He raised a rifle, aiming not at Dante, but at the sliver of Elena he could see exposed behind the pillar. Dante saw the aim shift. He didn't think so. He didn't calculate. He threw himself to the left, directly into the path of the bullet. The impact spun him around. A spray of red mist erupted from his shoulder. "Dante!" Elena's scream tore her throat. He hit the ground hard, but he didn't stay down. With a roar of pure, adrenaline-fueled rage, he pushed himself up to his knees. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, blood pouring down his tactical vest, but his right hand was steady. He raised his gun. The Silva lieutenant was cycling the bolt of his rifle for a second shot. He was too slow. Dante fired once, twice, 3 times. The lieutenant dropped. Silence descended on the parking lot as abruptly as the noise had started. The remaining Silva men, seeing their leader dead and Dante's reinforcements closing in from the perimeter, threw down their weapons or ran into the night. It was over. Dante stayed on his knees for a second, swaying. Then he tipped forward. Elena scrambled out from behind the pillar. She didn't care about the stray bullets or the gas or the rain. She ran to him, sliding on the wet asphalt, collapsing beside him. "Dante!" She grabbed his face, her hands instantly slick with rain and blood. "Dante, look at me!" He was pale, his skin gray under the harsh lights of the arriving backup vehicles. His eyes were unfocused, fluttering shut. "Elena," he rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. "Safe! I'm safe!" she sobbed, pressing her hand over the wound on his shoulder, trying to stem the flow. The blood was hot, so hot against the freezing rain. "I'm safe. You did it. Please, Dante, stay awake. You have to stay awake." "The baby," he mumbled, his head lolling back against her knees. "He's fine. We're both fine. Just stay with me." She looked up, screaming into the darkness. "Help! Someone help him!" Rico was there a second later, shouting orders. Men were lifting Dante, putting him onto a stretcher, loading him into a clean van. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police finally arriving to clean up a mess they didn't understand. "We have to go. Elena," Rico said, grabbing her arm. "We can't be here when the cops arrive." "I'm not leaving him," she cried, clinging to Dante's hand as they loaded him in. "You're riding with him," Rico promised. "Go." The medical safe house was a sterile, white room hidden beneath a laundromat in the suburbs. It smelled of antiseptic and fear. For 3 days, Dante drifted in and out of consciousness. The bullet had shattered his clavicle and nicked an artery. He had lost a lot of blood. The doctor, an old man who asked no questions and accepted cash, said it was touch and go for the first 24 hours. Elena didn't leave the room. She sat in a hard plastic chair by the bed, her hand resting on Dante's uninjured arm. She slept in fitful bursts, her head resting on the mattress. She watched the monitors, counting the beeps of his heart, the same rhythm she had heard on the ultrasound, now fighting to keep beating. On the third night, the fever set in. Dante thrashed in the sheets, sweat soaking through his hospital gown. He muttered names of dead men, shouted orders to phantom soldiers. Elena wiped his forehead with a cool cloth, whispering soothing words, trying to anchor him to reality. "Dante, it's me," she whispered. "It's Elena. You're safe." He stilled suddenly, his head turned on the pillow, his eyes opening. They were glassy, fever bright, seeing something that wasn't in the room. "Elena," he whispered. But he didn't say it like a question. He said it like a revelation. He reached up, his hand trembling, and grasped her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "The rain," he murmured, his voice thick. "You were shivering. The blue dress. The strap was broken." Elena froze. He was talking about that night, the details he had lost. "I gave you my jacket," he continued, his eyes searching the ceiling. "You told me your name. You said—" He paused, a frown creasing his brow as he fought through the haze of the drugs and the fever. "You said, I'm nobody." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, spilling over hot and fast. She had said that when he had asked who she was, terrified and shaking in the back of his car. She had whispered, "I'm nobody." "And I said," Dante whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I said, you are mine now." Elena let out a choked sob. He hadn't said you're safe. That was what she had told herself later to make sense of it. He had said you are mine, a claim, a promise. Even through the drugs, even then he had claimed her. "You remember," she wept, pressing his hand to her cheek. "I remember," he rasped. "I remember the smell of vanilla. I remember I didn't want to let you go. I fought to sleep because I didn't want to let you go." His eyes drifted closed again, the effort of the memory draining the last of his reserves. His breathing evened out, deeper this time, less frantic. The fever seemed to break with the confession, the heat radiating off him beginning to cool. Elena sat there in the quiet hum of the machinery, weeping silently. It hadn't been a one-sided infatuation. It hadn't been a mistake. For 6 months, she had thought she was a victim of circumstance, a woman who got pregnant by a ghost who didn't know she existed. But she was wrong. He had remembered the vanilla. He had remembered the broken strap. He had fought to stay awake for her. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his hand. "You didn't let me go," she whispered into the silence. "And I'm never letting you go." Outside, the city of Valmont slept, unaware that the war was over. Inside the room, a family was beginning to heal. The autumn leaves in Valmont had turned from a vibrant, burning red to a crisp, brittle brown, signaling the shift of seasons. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the shootout in the abandoned parking lot. The city, once a chessboard of tension and impending violence, had settled into a quiet, watchful peace. The Silva family was gone, with their leadership decimated in the ambush. The remaining lieutenants had scattered like cockroaches exposed to sudden light. Some fled the state. Others had come to Dante on their knees, begging for mercy or neutrality. Dante had granted neither easily, but the result was absolute. The streets belonged to the Moretti family again. But this time, the rule was different. It was quieter. There was less chaos, more order. It was the rule of a man who had something to lose. Dante's recovery had been slow and frustrating. The bullet had done significant damage to the muscle and bone of his shoulder. For 2 weeks, his arm had been immobilized in a sling, forcing him to rely on others in a way he despised. But Elena had been there. She changed his bandages with steady hands. She helped him dress. She sat with him during the long, sleepless nights when the pain meds wore off and the old ghosts tried to creep back in. The safe house in the hills was no longer a fortress of solitude. It had become a home. But before they could fully settle into this new reality, Elena needed to close the door on the old one. On a crisp Tuesday morning, a convoy of SUVs rolled into Elena's old neighborhood. It looked smaller now, grittier than she remembered. The peeling paint on the buildings, the trash in the gutters. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had walked these streets, hiding her pregnancy under oversized coats, terrified of the future. Dante insisted on coming with her, though he stayed by the door of her tiny apartment, his arm finally free of the sling but still stiff. 2 of his men stood in the hallway. Elena walked through the cramped space, touching the few items that had been hers: a chipped mug, a stack of paperback books, the worn uniform from Marco's diner hanging on the back of the bathroom door. She took the uniform off the hook. The teal fabric smelled of old grease and exhaustion. She held it for a moment, remembering the woman who used to wear it, the woman who had felt invisible, powerless, and alone. "You don't need that," Dante said from the doorway. His voice was low, resonating in the small room. Elena turned to look at him. He looked out of place here, a titan in a tailored suit standing in a room with water-stained ceilings. "I know," Elena said. She folded the uniform and placed it gently in the trash bin. "I just wanted to say goodbye to her, the girl who was too scared to ask for help." Dante walked over to her. He didn't move with the predatory grace of before. He moved with the grounded assurance of a partner. He reached out with his good hand, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "She was strong," Dante said. "She survived. Never forget that. She survived because of you," Elena corrected softly. "No." Dante shook his head, his thumb grazing her cheek. "I just gave her a ride. She did the rest." They left the apartment with only 1 box of personal items. Elena didn't look back. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, breathing in the cool air, she felt a shift in her chest. The heavy weight of survival mode was lifting. She wasn't running anymore. She was moving forward. A week later, Elena woke up to an empty bed. This wasn't unusual. Dante often rose before dawn to handle business so he could be present during the day. But today, there was a note on his pillow. "Come to the East Wing when you wake up." Elena rubbed the sleep from her eyes, maneuvering her heavy body out of the tangled sheets. She was days away from her due date, and moving had become a logistical challenge. Her back arched, her feet were swollen, and she felt like a ship carrying precious cargo through a storm. She put on her robe and waddled down the long hallway toward the east wing of the mansion. This section of the house had been closed off for renovations for the last month. Dante had been secretive about it, claiming it was structural repairs. When she reached the double doors at the end of the hall, Dante was waiting. He leaned against the door frame, holding 2 mugs of tea. He looked relaxed, wearing a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, the hard edges of the dawn softened by the domestic morning light. "Good morning," he said, handing her a mug. "Chamomile and honey." "What is this?" Elena asked, gesturing to the doors. "More structural repairs?" "Something like that." Dante smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes, a sight that still made Elena's heart skip a beat. "Go inside." He pushed the doors open. Elena stepped across the threshold and stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a room, it was a sanctuary. The nursery was spacious, bathed in natural light from the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the garden. The walls were painted a soft, calming sage green. In the center of the room stood a beautiful, hand-carved walnut crib, sturdy and timeless. A plush nursing chair sat in the corner next to a bookshelf already filled with children's classics, but it was the details that broke her. On the wall, framed in silver, was the sonogram picture, the one that had made Dante cry. On the shelf, next to a soft teddy bear, was a small wooden car, clearly vintage. "That was mine," Dante said, stepping up behind her, his hand resting gently on her lower back. "My mother gave it to me before she passed. I wanted him to have it." Elena walked deeper into the room, her fingers trailing over the smooth railing of the crib. She saw a mobile hanging above it. Tiny, hand-painted stars and moons. Everything was perfect. It was safe. It was warm. It was a testament to a future she hadn't dared to imagine. And suddenly, it was too much. The tears came without warning. A sob ripped through her chest, loud and ragged. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Elena?" Dante was there instantly, turning her around, concerned, etching deep lines into his forehead. "What is it? Do you not like it? We can change it. We can burn it down and start over." "No," she gasped, laughing through her tears at his extreme solution. "No, it's beautiful. It's perfect." "Then why are you crying?" "Because I'm terrified," she confessed, looking up at him with wet, wide eyes. "It's too good. Dante, I'm so used to looking over my shoulder. I'm so used to things being taken away. I'm scared to trust this. I'm scared that if I let myself be this happy, the universe is going to punish me." She clutched the front of his sweater, burying her face in his chest. "I don't know how to be safe. I don't know how to believe that this is real." Dante went still. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against him, his chin resting on the top of her head. He let her cry, absorbing her fear, letting his strength seep into her bones when her sobs subsided to sniffles. He pulled back slightly. He took her hand, the one trembling with anxiety, and placed it flat against the center of his chest, through the wool of his sweater. She could feel the heavy, rhythmic thud of his heart. It was steady, unwavering, a drumbeat of war and love. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Elena nodded. Dante dropped to one knee. It was a struggle with his healing shoulder, but he did it without flinching. He looked up at her, his dark eyes fierce and open. He kept her hand pressed against his heart. "This heart used to beat only for survival," he said. "It was a cold, selfish thing. But you changed that. You and this boy." He reached out and laid his other hand on her stomach. "I cannot promise you that the world will be kind," Dante vowed. "I cannot promise that there will be no storms, but I promise you this, as long as there is breath in my lungs, nothing will ever take this away from you. I am the wall between you and the darkness. This heart beats for both of you now. Trust in that." Elena looked down at him, at the man who had once been a stranger in a nightmare, now the anchor of her life. The fear didn't vanish completely. Trauma didn't work that way, but it quieted. It curled up and went to sleep, soothed by the conviction in his voice. "I trust you," she whispered. 4 days later, the storm broke. It started at 2 a.m, a low ache in Elena's lower back that radiated forward in waves. She tried to ignore it, shifting in bed, but an hour later, the wave turned into a vice grip that stole her breath. "Dante," she gasped, shaking his shoulder. He was awake instantly. No grogginess, no confusion. He sat up, his eyes scanning the room for threats before landing on her face. "Is it time?" he asked. "I think so," she groaned, gripping the sheets as another contraction rolled through her. Dante didn't panic. He didn't shout. He became a machine of efficiency. He was out of bed, dressed, and grabbing the pre-packed hospital bag in under 2 minutes. He helped her up, supporting her weight as she breathed through the pain. "The car is ready," he said, guiding her down the stairs. "Rico is opening the gate. The route to the private hospital is clear." In the car, Elena squeezed the leather armrest until her knuckles turned white. Dante drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding hers. He drove fast, but smooth, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors, scanning the shadows. Even now, in this primal, human moment, he was the protector. "You're doing good," he murmured when she let out a sharp cry. "Just breathe. We're almost there." The hospital was a private facility owned by the family. They bypassed the emergency room chaos and were whisked straight up to a secure suite. The doctors and nurses moved with a deferential haste, knowing exactly who was pacing the floor. The hours that followed were a blur of agony and exhaustion. The epidural took the edge off, but the pressure remained. Elena felt like she was being torn apart and put back together. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, it was time to push. "I can't," Elena sobbed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. "Dante, I can't do it. I'm too tired." "Look at me," Dante commanded. He was right there at her shoulder, not looking away, not flinching at the blood or the screams. He wiped her face with a cool cloth. "You are the strongest thing I have ever known. You survived the fire. You survived the war. You can do this." "It hurts," she cried. "I know," he whispered, brushing a kiss against her temple. "I know. Amore. But he is fighting to meet you. Help him." With a guttural scream that seemed to rip from the very center of her soul, Elena pushed. The room narrowed down to a single point of focus. The pain was blinding, all-consuming. And then, release. A sharp, indignant cry pierced the air. "He's here," the doctor announced, voice triumphant. "It's a boy." Elena collapsed back against the pillows, gasping, her chest heaving. The crying got louder, a strong, healthy sound. Dante stood frozen at the foot of the bed. He watched as the nurses cleaned the baby, wrapping him in a white blanket. His hands, usually so sure, hung uselessly at his sides. "Mr. Moretti?" a nurse said gently. "Would you like to hold your son?" Dante nodded, unable to speak. The nurse placed the bundle in his arms. Dante looked down. The baby was tiny, red-faced and squirming. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut against the harsh world. Dante Moretti, the man who had stared down gunmen and ordered executions without blinking, crumbled. Tears streamed silently down his face. His shoulders shook. He held the baby with a terrifying gentleness, terrified he might break something so perfect. He brought the bundle closer, inhaling the scent of new life, a clean, sweet smell that chased away the scent of smoke and gunpowder that had clung to Dante for so many years. "He's perfect," Dante choked out, turning to show Elena. Elena reached out, her arms heavy but eager. Dante placed their son on her chest. The baby settled instantly, sensing the heartbeat he had listened to for 9 months. "Hi," Elena whispered, stroking the soft cheek. "Hi there." It was late. The hospital room was dim and quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the monitors and the rhythmic breathing of the newborn sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed. Elena lay awake, exhausted but too wired to sleep. Dante sat in the chair next to the bed, his hand resting on her leg. He was watching the baby, his gaze intense and unblinking, as if keeping guard against bad dreams. "He looks like you," Elena whispered. Dante turned to her. The strain of the last few weeks, the shooting, the surgery, the war seemed to have vanished from his face, replaced by a profound peace. "He has your chin," Dante countered softly, "and your stubbornness. He fought the nurses for 10 minutes before he would sleep." Elena smiled tiredly. She reached out and took Dante's hand. He laced their fingers together, bringing her knuckles to his lips. "Dante," she said, "do you really remember?" He paused, kissing her hand again. "Remember what?" "That night," she said, "at the club, before the drugs took over, before everything went black." Dante looked at her, his eyes serious. "I told you in the fever dream," he said. "I remember the vanilla." "I know," she said, "but was it real, or was it just your mind trying to fill in the blanks?" Dante stood up. He leaned over the bed, bracing his hands on the mattress on either side of her, caging her in gently. "It was real," he whispered. "I remember the way the light hit your hair when you walked into the VIP section with that tray of drinks. I remember thinking you looked like you were holding your breath. I remember that when the fighting started. My only thought was that I had to get to you." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I remember the drive," he continued, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "You were shivering. I gave you my jacket. You asked me why I was helping you. Do you remember what I said?" Elena shook her head slightly. That part was still a blur for her. "I didn't say anything," Dante murmured, "because I didn't have the words then. I just knew that if I let you out of that car, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I fought the darkness. Elena, I fought the drugs. I watched you walk into your building, and I forced myself to memorize the number on the door." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "You asked if I remembered that night. I do now. Every second, the fear, the adrenaline, the moment I touched your skin, and I'd relive it 1,000 times. The ambush, the fire, the bullet in my shoulder. I would do it all again every single day, if it meant finding you again." Elena let out a shaky breath, tears of happiness slipping from her eyes. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was their beginning. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you," Dante replied, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted of promise and forever. 3 days later, they walked out of the hospital. The paparazzi were gone. Dante's men had ensured a private exit. The sun was shining, bright and blinding, reflecting off the wet pavement of the parking lot. Dante carried the car seat in one hand, his grip firm. His other arm was wrapped securely around Elena's waist, supporting her, shielding her. They stopped at the curb as the black SUV pulled up. The driver opened the door. Before getting in, Dante paused. He looked around the city. His city. It was still dangerous. It was still loud. It was still full of shadows. But looking at it now, he didn't see a battlefield. He saw a future. He looked down at Elena, who was smiling at the sleeping baby in the carrier. They were a family, forged in fire, bound by blood and chosen by love. "Ready to go home?" Dante asked. Elena looked up at him, her eyes clear and strong. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." They climbed into the car, the door closing with a solid thud, shutting out the noise of the world, leaving only the three of them, safe and together, as the car pulled away into the bright morning light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Dante and Elena from that rainy night at the club to their happy ending as a family. It's been an emotional ride full of danger, secrets, and redemption. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where in the world you are listening from today. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more passionate, intense tales like this one, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of the ending? Did Dante redeem himself? Share your thoughts in the comments section. I read every single one. Until next time, thanks for watching.